Elena's world ended with the sound of laughter turning to gasps, the innocent tug of a baby's fingers revealing the secret she had fought desperately to hide from the world of wealth she silently served. Blood rushed to her ears as time slowed to an excruciating crawl. The champagne-soaked air of the Wellington Estate's grand terrace suddenly felt thick, unbreathable. Little Jacob's delighted giggle cut through Elena's panic like a knife as he waved his prize, her expensive wig, in triumphant, chubby fingers. Her bare scalp, evidence of her brutal battle with stage 3 cancer, exposed to 200 pairs of judging eyes. "My God," whispered Celeste Wellington, the perfectly Botoxed horror on her face mirrored by the crowd of Silicon Valley titans and Hollywood elites who had gathered to celebrate her son's first birthday. The string quartet faltered, notes dying in the afternoon sun as phones began to rise, capturing her humiliation for posterity and social media consumption. Elena had survived 3 rounds of aggressive chemotherapy. She had worked double shifts with poison still coursing through her veins, scrubbing toilets while fighting nausea, polishing silver while her bones ached from marrow-stimulating injections. She had smiled and served and remained invisible while her body waged war against itself. But nothing had prepared her for this moment of absolute, shattering exposure. The weight of stares pressed against her skin like physical blows. She saw pity in some eyes, disgust in others, and worst of all, the calculated assessment of how this unexpected drama might affect their relationships with the Wellington family empire. These were people who donated millions to cancer research galas but couldn't bear the reality of the disease standing before them in a servant's uniform. Elena reached for her wig with trembling fingers, but Jacob, delighted with his new toy, pulled it further away, his innocent game twisting the knife of her humiliation. She fought the urge to run, knowing that dignity was the only currency she had left. Her vision tunneled as memories flashed unbidden. The doctor's grim expression when he showed her the scans, the number on her last medical bill with too many zeros, the phone call to her mother in Guatemala where she had lied about her health so money could still flow home. Marcus Wellington III, whose fortune had been built on pharmaceutical patents including drugs she couldn't afford, turned from his conversation with a senator. His steel-gray eyes locked with hers across the sudden divide of revealed truth. In his gaze, Elena saw something unexpected: recognition. Not of her as a person in 3 years of employment. He had barely spoken 10 words to her, but recognition of something deeper, something that sliced through the carefully maintained barriers between their worlds. "Daddy, look!" Jacob squealed, waving the wig. "Hat! Big hat!" The room held its breath. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs with such force she was certain everyone could hear it. This job had been her lifeline, the generous salary, the health insurance that covered at least part of her treatments, the flexible schedule that allowed her to attend chemotherapy appointments. All of it now balanced on the edge of a precipice, ready to tumble into the abyss with her dignity. A single tear escaped before she could stop it, tracking down her cheek like a crystal admission of weakness. She had promised herself she would never cry in front of them, these people who moved through life cushioned from its harshest realities. But now her secret was laid bare, her struggle on display like an uncomfortable art exhibit no one had asked to see. Celeste Wellington stepped forward, her Louboutins clicking against imported Italian marble, designer dress whispering expensive promises with each movement. Her perfectly manicured hand reached for her son, her expression a complex mixture of maternal protection and social damage control. "Jacob, darling, give that back to Elena," she said, her voice straining for normalcy while her eyes darted to the watching crowd, assessing the social cost of this unscripted moment. But before she could reach him, Marcus Wellington did something no one expected. He crossed the sudden void that had opened in his perfect party, moving with purpose through guests who parted like water. He reached his son and knelt beside the high chair, his bespoke suit creasing in ways his image consultant would have lamented. "May I see that, champion?" he asked Jacob quietly, gently taking the wig from his son's grasp. The collective breath of 200 influential people hung suspended as Marcus Wellington, whose ruthlessness in business was legendary, whose divorce had made tabloid headlines for its coldness, whose name appeared on hospital wings but never in volunteer logs, turned toward Elena with her wig cradled in his hands like something precious. What happened next would shatter more than just the perfect facade of a billionaire's birthday party. It would crack open hearts long calcified by privilege, rewrite the narrative of lives moving in parallel but never touching, and reveal how the smallest hands can sometimes tear down the tallest walls between human souls. Elena braced herself for pity, for dismissal, for the quiet conversation later where she would be let go with generous severance and the unspoken agreement that her illness was inconvenient for the Wellington image. What she couldn't possibly prepare for was the truth that waited on the other side of her exposure, a truth that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed that fateful moment when a baby's innocent curiosity pulled away more than just a wig. The unexpected revelation. Marcus Wellington stepped forward, the expensive wig held carefully in his hands. The party remained frozen in that peculiar suspended animation that only true shock can create. 200 powerful people suddenly powerless in the face of raw human vulnerability. Everyone. Marcus's voice carried the authority that had built a pharmaceutical empire. Please enjoy the refreshments. The pianist will begin momentarily. It wasn't a suggestion. The crowd reluctantly dispersed, gravitating toward the champagne fountains and gourmet hors d'oeuvre stations, though their attention remained fixed on the unfolding drama. Social media managers discreetly pocketed phones that had been poised to capture the moment. With a subtle nod toward the house, Marcus gestured for Elena to follow him. Her legs moved mechanically, dignity somehow intact despite the burning humiliation coursing through her veins. The weight of stairs pressed against her back as they walked, Jacob still babbling happily in his father's arms, oblivious to the earthquake he had triggered. They entered Marcus's private study, a room Elena cleaned daily but had never been invited to occupy. Rich mahogany paneling and leather-bound first editions created an atmosphere of old-world power. Marcus closed the door, shutting out the murmur of the party. "Please sit," he said, indicating a leather chair worth more than 3 months of her salary. They entered Marcus's private study, a room Elena cleaned daily but had never been invited to occupy. Rich mahogany paneling and leather-bound first editions created an atmosphere of old-world power. Marcus closed the door, shutting out the murmur of the party. "Please sit," he said, indicating a leather chair worth more than 3 months of her salary. Elena perched on the edge, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of someone prepared for dismissal. Marcus placed the wig gently on his desk and settled Jacob with a wooden puzzle before turning his full attention to her. "How long?" he asked simply. The question contained multitudes. How long had she been sick? How long had she been hiding it? How long did she have left? Elena swallowed hard against the knot in her throat. The diagnosis came 20 months ago, stage 3 ovarian cancer. Her voice emerged steadier than she felt. The prognosis was not favorable. Marcus's expression remained unreadable. "And you continued working through treatment?" "I had no choice, Mr. Wellington." For the first time, a flash of defiance broke through her professional demeanor. "The insurance helps, but the copays, the experimental treatments not covered. And my mother in Guatemala depends on what I send home." Something shifted in Marcus's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the uncomfortable awareness of privilege confronting necessity. He glanced at a framed photograph on his desk. His late wife, Caroline, smiling from a yacht deck, the wind catching her golden hair. The irony wasn't lost on Elena, that the woman who had hired her 3 years ago had later succumbed to the same disease now ravaging her own body. "Why didn't you come to us? Ask for help?" His question held genuine confusion. "We have a foundation specifically for employees with serious medical conditions." "Yes, I read the handbook." Elena's smile held no warmth. "The foundation that requires full disclosure to HR, to management, to the board that reviews cases. The foundation that makes beautiful promotional materials featuring the grateful recipients." Understanding dawned slowly across Marcus's face. "You wanted privacy." "I wanted dignity," Elena corrected quietly. "I wanted to be Elena who does her job exceptionally well. Not Elena the charity case. Elena the tragedy. Elena whose bald head and weight loss become whispered topics in the break room. Jacob abandoned his puzzle and toddled over, patting Elena's knee with innocent affection. The gesture nearly broke her carefully maintained composure. "Does anyone know?" Marcus asked. "My doctor. My mother thinks I'm taking night classes, working toward a better position." Elena's laugh held no humor. "She prays for my success every night." Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, suddenly looking less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man confronting uncomfortable truths. He turned toward the window, seemingly gathering his thoughts, while Jacob climbed onto Elena's lap with the easy trust of childhood. "My wife," he began, then stopped, the words visibly difficult. Caroline didn't want anyone to know either at first. She wore wigs until the treatments became too aggressive. She hated the way people looked at her, not as the brilliant architect she was, but as someone dying. The revelation hung in the air between them. Elena had started working for the Wellingtons shortly after Caroline's death. The staff whispered that grief had transformed Marcus from a merely ambitious man into a ruthless one, that his subsequent success had been built on the foundation of his personal loss. "Mr. Wellington, I don't expect." "What's your treatment protocol?" he interrupted, turning back to face her. The abrupt change startled her. Weekly chemotherapy with carbivin and PZX-14. When I can afford it." Marcus went completely still. "PZX-14? You're on the Wellington Pharmaceuticals trial. The standard dose, the high-efficacy protocol is beyond my means." Something changed in Marcus's expression, a dawning horror that Elena couldn't quite interpret. He walked to his desk, pulled out his laptop, and typed rapidly. His face paled as he read the screen. "PZX-14 high-efficacy protocol. $14,200 per treatment cycle. Insurance coverage. Limited to standard protocol." He looked up, voice hollow. "My company charges cancer patients $14,000 for medication that costs us less than $800 to produce." The irony crashed down with devastating force. Elena had been cleaning the home of the very man whose pricing policies had placed her life-saving treatment out of reach. She had dusted the awards his company had received for innovation in oncology care, while rationing her own medication. "It's business," Elena said softly, without accusation. "I understand how these things work." "Do you?" Marcus's voice had changed, something raw breaking through his controlled exterior. "Because I'm not sure I do anymore." Jacob, sensing the tension, patted Elena's cheek with sticky fingers. "Ella sad?" he asked in his limited vocabulary. Before she could respond, the study door opened. Celeste Wellington entered, her perfect composure slightly frayed at the edges. "Marcus, the Johnsons are asking about the Asia merger, and honestly, this whole situation is becoming awkward. People are talking." Her gaze flicked dismissively over Elena. "I've called the agency to send a replacement for the rest of the party." Marcus turned to his wife with an expression Elena had never seen during her years of invisible service, something between grief and revelation. "Did you know," he asked quietly, "that Elena has been fighting the same cancer that took Caroline? Using medications our company produces? Medications priced so high she can barely afford them while working 2 jobs." Celeste's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. What? No, of course I didn't. She didn't want to be pitted, just like Caroline." Marcus's voice had gained a strange intensity. "She hid it from everyone while still performing her duties flawlessly. And now our son has inadvertently exposed her secret to 200 of our closest friends, many of whom sit on the board that approves our pharmaceutical pricing." Understanding dawned slowly across Celeste's face, followed quickly by calculation, the instinctive assessment of public relations implications. "Marcus, whatever you're thinking." "What I'm thinking," he interrupted with quiet force, "is that Caroline would be ashamed of what I've become, what we've become." Elena stood carefully, settling Jacob back on his feet. "Mr. Wellington, Mrs. Wellington, I should go. I'll collect my things and—" "No." Marcus's response was immediate and firm. "You're not going anywhere except to the best oncology center in the country. As of this moment, you're on fully paid medical leave." Celeste's eyes widened in alarm. Marcus, you can't just... I can. And that's just the beginning. Something had awakened in Marcus Wellington. Something that had perhaps been dormant since he had buried his wife. Elena's treatment will be fully covered, including the high-efficacy protocol. And tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency board meeting to revisit our entire pricing structure. The room fell silent except for Jacob's happy babbling as he returned to his puzzle. Elena stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter whatever extraordinary moment was unfolding. Why? She finally asked, the question barely audible. Marcus looked at his son, then back at Elena, then finally at the photograph of his late wife. Because sometimes it takes a child to show us who we've become. And sometimes it takes seeing someone else's strength to recognize our own weakness. The revelation hung in the air not just of Elena's illness, but of something far more profound. The recognition that the walls separating their worlds had always been artificial, constructed from privilege and maintained by indifference. And it had taken the innocent hands of a child to tear them down. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, gradual yet profound in their change. The Wellington estate, once a showcase of wealth and exclusivity, had transformed in ways no interior designer could have orchestrated. The East Wing, previously reserved for entertaining business associates and political connections, now housed the headquarters of the Wellington Healthcare Accessibility Initiative. Conference rooms where billion-dollar mergers had been negotiated were filled with patient advocates, medical ethicists, and policy experts working to dismantle the very pricing structures that had built the Wellington fortune. On this particular morning, Elena walked slowly through the garden, her strength returning in small but significant increments. Her head was wrapped in a colorful scarf, not from shame, but from personal choice. The early spring sunshine felt different on her skin, as if her body was relearning the simple pleasure of warmth. Ella! Ella! Jacob's excited voice carried across the lawn as he toddled toward her, Marcus following close behind. At 18 months old, Jacob had developed a vocabulary of dozens of words, but Ella remained one of his favorites. Good morning, little one, Elena smiled, kneeling carefully to receive his enthusiastic hug. The movement no longer brought the sharp pain that had been her constant companion for so long. Marcus approached, carrying a tablet and wearing the casual clothes that had replaced his perpetual suit and tie. The transformation in his appearance mirrored the deeper changes within. The board approved the final phase, he said without preamble, his eyes bright with an energy that had nothing to do with profit margins. Starting next quarter, all Wellington Pharmaceuticals cancer medications will be available on a sliding scale payment system. Elena straightened, steadying herself against a garden bench. All of them? Even the experimental treatments? Especially those. Marcus set the tablet down, watching as Jacob explored a nearby flower bed. The board wasn't unanimous, but after I threatened to take everything public, even Harrison came around. Elena smiled, remembering the pinch-faced CFO who had been the most vocal opponent of Marcus's radical new direction. I still can't believe this is happening. Neither can Wall Street. Marcus laughed, a sound that had once been rare in the Wellington household but now echoed frequently through the halls. Our stock dropped 18% when we announced the initial pricing reforms, then climbed 26% when patients started coming forward with their stories. He sat beside her on the bench, his gaze following his son's adventures among the daffodils. The comfortable silence between them would have been unimaginable in their previous lives, employer and employee, separated by invisible but impenetrable barriers of class and circumstance. The foundation received 3,000 applications last week, he continued. People who couldn't afford their medications, who were choosing between treatment and feeding their families. His voice tightened. One woman had been cutting her pills in half for 8 months, trying to make them last. A medication my company produces for $11 a unit and sells for $300. Elena placed her hand gently on his arm. Another boundary crossed. Another wall dissolved. You're changing that now. Not fast enough. The familiar intensity returned to his eyes. But Celeste's media campaign is gaining traction. 4 pharmaceutical companies have agreed to join our accessibility pledge. The mention of Celeste brought a smile to Elena's lips. Perhaps the most surprising transformation had been in Mrs. Wellington, who had channeled her considerable social influence into becoming the public face of the initiative. The woman who had once carefully curated her image for maximum social advantage now used that skill to shame industry leaders into ethical reform. "She's meeting with the Senate committee today?" Elena asked. Marcus nodded. "With a dozen patients who've been affected by predatory pricing. She's become quite the formidable advocate." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by Jacob's delighted discoveries in the garden. Elena's thoughts drifted to the medical center where she now received the full protocol treatment. The same center where dozens of Wellington household staff and their families were receiving care previously beyond their reach. "The doctors say your latest scans show significant improvement," Marcus said quietly, his gaze still on his son. Elena smiled. "Dr. Patel seems optimistic, though she cautions against too much hope too quickly." "Hope is a beginning, not an outcome," Marcus replied, quoting the words Elena had spoken to him during one of her darker days of treatment. The sound of car tires on the gravel driveway drew their attention. A modest sedan pulled up, and Elena's smile widened as she recognized the elderly woman being helped from the passenger seat. "Mama," she called, rising from the bench. Marcus stood as well. "I thought she wasn't arriving until tomorrow." The arrangements were finalized early. Elena's voice caught with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Her mother approached slowly, taking in the grandeur of the estate with wide eyes. Elena had told her about the changes in her circumstances, but seeing the Wellington mansion in person was clearly overwhelming. When she spotted Elena, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Mi hija," she whispered, opening her arms. Their embrace bridged more than physical distance. It connected worlds that had been separated by borders, by economics, by the arbitrary divisions of human society. As they held each other, Elena felt the weight of secrets lifting. No more lies about night classes, about her health, about the reality of her life. "Mama, I want you to meet someone," Elena said in Spanish, turning toward Marcus. "This is Mr. Wellington, my friend." Marcus stepped forward and took the older woman's hand with genuine warmth. "Please call me Marcus. Your daughter has changed my life in ways I can never repay." Jacob, noticing the newcomer, abandoned his floral explorations and hurried over, arms outstretched in his universal greeting for anyone who entered his world. Elena's mother knelt despite her arthritis and welcomed the child's hug with the natural grace of a grandmother. "This is the little one?" she asked Elena in Spanish. "The angel who pulled off your wig?" Elena translated for Marcus, who laughed and nodded. "My son, the accidental revolutionary." As they walked toward the house, Jacob insisting on holding both Elena's hand and her mother's, Marcus's phone chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it and stopped, his expression shifting. "It's from Celeste," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "The Senate committee has agreed to open a formal investigation into pharmaceutical pricing practices. They're calling it the Accessibility and Transparency Act." Elena felt her breath catch. "That's wonderful news. There's more." Marcus looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "They've asked if you would be willing to testify. Your story, a hard-working immigrant paying taxes while unable to afford medication from the company where you worked. It's powerful. It puts a human face on the statistics." Elena hesitated, the old instinct for privacy rising briefly before dissolving in the warmth of new purpose. "Yes," she said finally. "I would be honored." As they continued toward the house, the billionaire, the housekeeper, the grandmother from Guatemala, and the toddler who had inadvertently started it all, the boundaries between them had dissolved like morning mist under the rising sun. Inside, the staff that had once maintained careful distance now moved with the ease of colleagues rather than servants. The Wellington home had become a headquarters for change, its opulent rooms repurposed for a revolution of compassion. That evening, as Elena sat with her mother on the terrace, where her secret had been exposed 6 months earlier, she watched Marcus reading a bedtime story to Jacob in the family room beyond the glass doors. The scene would have been unimaginable in the old hierarchy of the household. "He is a good man," her mother observed, following her gaze, though perhaps he needed to be reminded of it. Elena nodded, touching the colorful scarf covering her head. New hair was beginning to grow, soft as a baby's. Sometimes people build walls around themselves without realizing it. It takes something unexpected to break through. "Like a child pulling off a wig?" her mother asked with gentle humor. "Exactly like that." Elena smiled. Sometimes the smallest hands create the biggest changes. In the following weeks, Elena would stand before the Senate committee, her story becoming the cornerstone of legislation that would reshape an industry. Celeste would launch a foundation supporting healthcare workers through catastrophic illness. Marcus would face shareholders angry about profit margins with the newfound courage of a man who had rediscovered his purpose. And Jacob, blissfully unaware of his role as catalyst, would continue to tear down walls simply by treating everyone he met with the same uncomplicated love, teaching the adults in his world that the divisions between people are never as solid or as necessary as we believe them to be. The story of the millionaire's baby and the maid's wig would be told and retold, eventually becoming shorthand for unexpected transformation. But for Elena, it would always be simpler. The moment when being seen, truly seen, changed everything. As the sunset painted the Malibu sky in impossible colors, Elena watched this new family she had somehow acquired and felt something that had been absent through all her months of treatment. Certainty. Not about her prognosis or her future, but about the fundamental truth that had emerged from her exposure. We are never truly separate from one another. And sometimes it takes a child to remind us of what we should have known all along, that the barriers we construct between human hearts are always artificial, waiting to be pulled away by innocent hands.